in respecting time, I would propose that we will invite now Ms. Esma Gamberidze, former Georgia Youth Representative to the United Nations. Esma is a chairperson and co-founder at Disabled Women's Organization, the Platform for New Opportunities, and an invited member at the Consultative Council on the Monitoring of Implementation, Protection, and Promotion of the UN Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, with the Ombudsman of Georgia. Please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I was a bit confused. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Being still young and being just a recently given up my UN Youth Delegate's mandate, I will speak more about Eastern Partnership region of the European Union, and also about Georgia and the situation with political and civic participation of women with disabilities, because these two are really interconnected. So if you try and Google women with disabilities and political participation of women with disabilities in the Eastern Partnership region, essentially nothing would pop out, which means there's very little discussion even on women with disabilities and their political participation. So this topic is even under-discussed and underrepresented. There has been recently a minister with disabilities, a female minister in Armenia. But these kind of things are rather exceptions. For example, in Georgia, we have up to 50,000 women with disabilities out of total amount of disabled persons of 130,000 people. So it's less than half, while according to the world estimates, it actually should be the other way around. There, on average, are more women with disabilities than men, which once again shows some issues with our statistical data. And also it might mean that there are stereotypes and stigma across, additional stigma across women with disabilities, which prevents them from acquiring formal status. In terms of voting, though, out of these women with disabilities, more of them voted on the last parliamentary elections of 2020 than amongst men. So in total, there were 3,660 voters with disabilities that showed up to the polls, and out of them, 1,860 were women, which makes a bit more than half. Also, among women with disabilities, there was higher turnout than among men with disabilities. But when it comes to more active participation beyond the voting, the figures are much more worrisome. Well, first of all, it should be noted that generally speaking, female participation in decision-making in Georgia is rather low. Only 20% of decision-making positions in public service are being held by women. There are about less than 20% of parliamentarians are women. There is no mayor or head of municipality amongst women. But of course, figures amongst women with disabilities are even lower. There have never been a disabled woman parliamentarian or minister, or at least the one who had declared and visible disability. While there have been 3 men with disabilities as parliamentarians since Georgia's restoration of independence. Excuse me. Excuse me. When we speak, I spoke with 3 women with disabilities. There were only 3 whom I could find who were engaged in some form in politics. They had never held any formal position in decision-making, neither for example, in city council or in parliament or in the government, like as a minister or any other one. I spoke with them, and I want to share some personal stories too to illustrate the situation. As I said, they never managed to achieve the elected position. Some of them were called even to a party after some men with disabilities have refused to engage. They, of course, lacked the resources that they needed to acquire the assistance that they needed to participate, for example, in door-to-door activities, which also was not possible for them due to inaccessibility of housing in general that they would have to visit. They had to, of course, there was no compensation for the additional time and effort that they were taking to engage in politics and engage their family members, and parties did not have any additional resources to provide them with assistance or transportation that they needed. Therefore, participating in the grassroots political activism was not accessible to them, and the parties did not take proactive measures either to engage them otherwise. Here also should be noted that these persons, these women with disabilities, felt low self-esteem, and this is due to our gender, the way that we are being brought up in our gender stereotypes, and they were much under-resourced. When we were talking about civic participation, which is prerequisite to political participation, there are only 4 or 5 disabled women-led NGOs here in Georgia. There's only one women's rights organization run by non-disabled women, which has employed just 1 woman with disabilities. While there are more women with disabilities in the informal feminist groups, 20%, so 1/5. In disabled persons' rights organizations, also only from 0 to 40% of membership are women with disabilities. Only 15 out of 125 employees are women with disabilities. So in disabled rights movement, women are women, as one women activist has said, while in the movement, women's rights movement, we are disabled persons. So we are marginalized both in the women's rights and disabled persons' rights movements. While it should be actually the other way around, as we are both women and persons with disabilities, our interests and rights should be advocated in the both of these movements. Also in gender equality councils with municipalities, out of 64 municipalities, only in 2 or 3 there have been women with disabilities as members. In disabled persons equality advisory councils, there are 64 municipalities in Georgia. Out of them, 50 of these have disabled persons inclusion councils, and only in 16 of these 50 there are women with disabilities as members present. And none of them is present in Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia and which holds 1/3 of its population, and of course holds more women with disabilities than any other city, therefore. I also would like to share a story that we encountered in 2018 when there were presidential elections. We, as women with disabilities, invited 6 presidential candidates to meet us and introduce their electoral platforms and programs. Only 2 of them have shown up. And the woman president, who then has been elected, did not come and did not wish to speak with us separately. We wanted to attend the event that was organized by non-disabled women, but it was not accessible for some of us physically, the building where this happened. Then when the female has been elected president of Georgia, we as women with disabilities again asked her to meet us. At that meeting, there were 2/3 of mothers with disability, of children with disabilities, and only maybe 1/3 or even less of us were actually women with disabilities. Therefore, the term mothers of disabled children or disabled adults and women with disabilities have been confused. This all shows how much work there has to be done in order to include us. And first of all, it's also about definition. What do we mean by inclusion? Who do we include and who do we refer to? People with disabilities and women with disabilities. Finally, I would like to talk about comes to good practices to include more women with disabilities in women's rights movement. The UN Women's Office here in Georgia supported women's and disabled women's rights platform, which unites the women with disabilities, of children and adults with disabilities, and NGOs that work on women's rights issues. And this, through this platform, first of all, we got to know each other, which has never maybe happened before. And now this network plans to empower and increase political and civic participation of women with disabilities in policymaking, in all other spheres of activism. And something else also to mention, that even all of these 3 women with disabilities who have had a political experience, at least as party activists, were having physical disability. No other. According to UNDP research and survey that was very large and that was conducted last year in 2020 about the public perception of people with disabilities, it turned out that persons with physical disabilities had higher approval by the society in the fact that if they would be elected as officials, if they would be employed around them, then, for example, people and also, of course, women with sensory disabilities, and then, of course, with intellectual or psychosocial disabilities. But yes, there is a hierarchy even amongst people with disabilities, amongst women with disabilities, that also has to somehow be addressed. As well as the mass employment of women with disabilities, which would help empowerment and later on would contribute to their political participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inspirational intervention.